Okay, so a little bit of introductions. First of all, can you guys hear me? Everybody hears me okay? Tomer, can you hear me? Okay, good. So we, the community here of Greater Philadelphia, are really lucky to have Tomer Persico, and I'll just start by a little bit of an introduction. Many of you on this call know him already. So Dr. Persico is a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. He's also a fellow, Rubenstein Fellow at Reichman University, a senior research scholar at UC Berkeley Center for the Middle East Studies, and he was a Koret visiting assistant professor at Berkeley for Jewish law and Israeli studies. He is an expert, and his fields of expertise include contemporary spirituality, Jewish modern identity, Jewish renewal, and other forms of secularization and religiosity in Israel. He wrote several books, including his first book, The Jewish Meditative Tradition, and a second book, In God's Image, Freedom, Selfhood, Freedom, and Equality. These are only some of his accolades. So we're really lucky to have Tomer here speak with us today. And before I start, I just wanted to remind everybody what this organization is. We are basically just people who are concerned about the situation in Israel, Israelis, American Jewish people, and we love Israel. As many of you have seen or came yourself, yesterday there was a big protest in the main line, kind of against a pro-Palestinian protest to try to bring the hostages back and to talk about the anti-Semitism and our love and passion to Israel. So that's a really important point. Anything that you're going to hear in this conversation or future conversations, do not take it as we are JVP or against the, we want to basically learn about Israel and
join the meeting.
Expose everybody as much as possible to the information that is happening in Israel. So with this, I think to phrase the conversation, Tomer, I don't know if you know this, but we've spoken a little bit about this, but in the last 4 months, as the war has started, there has been a huge involvement of the American Jewish community here in Philadelphia, Greater Philadelphia, honestly, all over the United States, in terms of what can we do to support Israel, the IDF, to help Israel, to bring back the hostages, the kidnapped, to fight in so many ways the anti-Semitism. And yet, Tomer, when I speak with a lot of the American Jewish people, some of them individually are telling me, we're not really sure what's happening in Israel, nor do we know how much should we be involved in what's happening in Israel. The politics, the government, all these protests that we've been seeing for a very long time, for well over the last year or so. So, I think that part of the talk that you're going to speak about is the different religious denominations or the composition and different battles or things that are happening currently in Israel and specifically in the government. And we'd be very interested in hearing your opinion. But also, we'd love to hear your thoughts about why is it important, in your opinion, that the American Jewish people will be involved and be aware of things that you're talking about. So with this, thank you very much, Tomer. And the format of this conversation is going to be about 30 minutes or so of a talk. And then we are highly encouraging you all to write in the chat different comments or questions that you have for Tomer. And let's start. Thank you, Tomer.
Great. Thank you, Yair, and hello, everybody. I'm glad you could join us and join me. I'm going to talk today specifically about a certain group in the Israeli scene. I'm going to talk about religious Zionism. And I'm going to dedicate the talk to them because I think they're one of perhaps the most important group when we look at Israeli society and Israeli politics, and when we try to conjecture what will happen in the coming years. They are a rising elite in Israeli society. We're talking about only about 10 to 12% of the Jewish population in Israel. That's all. But again, a rising elite, and I would even say a serving elite. If you look at the numbers, it's not, it's with all its discomfort. If you look at the numbers of casualties in this current war, the religious Zionists are serving more than their share in the population, and you have to respect that. I want to talk specifically, though, about a certain part of religious Zionism, about the most extreme fundamentalist part of religious Zionism, which is in itself about 15% of religious Zionism. because this part is currently representing them in government. We are talking about Bezalel Smotrich, our Minister of Finance. We're talking about Itamar Ben-Gvir, our Minister of Police or National Security, as he elected to call his office. And I think we need to notice what's happening over there. So I'm going to start with a brief history of religious Zionism. I'm going to then talk about the different groups in the most extreme part of religious Zionism, fundamentalist religious Zionism. And finally, I'm going to talk about why this matters and what are the possible eventualities of all that I talked about. So religious Zionism as a modern Jewish identity began with Rabbi Yitzhak Yaakov Reines's joining Herzl in the Zionist movement. This is the end of the 19th century. An Orthodox Jew, looking as we today would typecast him as Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, joining Herzl and thinking about immigration of Jews to Israel. That was the Mizrahi part of religious Zionism, the first phase of religious Zionism. Mizrahi is, first of all, it's an acronym of spiritual center, but that doesn't matter in Hebrew. But it was a very dovish, lenient in politics, left-wing really in politics, movement, people who were mostly concerned about conserving as many Jewish lives as possible and creating a safe haven for Jews really in Israel. That was the main concern for them. And I mean, and I'll just give an example. Before the Six-Day War, which was basically their epitaph, their end, the end of the Mizrahi movement. After the Six-Day War, something else happened. But before the Six-Day War, these people were talking about the heads, their political leaders were talking about not going to war, if at all possible. And if so, if we were to conquer the east side of Jerusalem, that Jerusalem itself would be internationalized. Okay, now imagine that as the political leadership of religious Zionism. That's what they thought at that time. After the Six-Day War, things changed. A new generation rose in religious Zionism, which adopted what we can call the Cookist theology. It's the theology of two rabbi cooks. One is Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Cook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, who was chief rabbi of Israel in 1921. He died in 1935, and he left an immense lore, brilliant and encompassing about the future state of the Jews as the divine seat on earth, the seat of the divine on earth. Cookism, though, really is the interpretation of that by his son, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Cook, who died in 82. So Tzvi Yehuda Cook witnessed both the Holocaust and the foundation of the State of Israel, which his father did not. And he took his father's lore and after the Six-Day War, shaped it into a messianic theology, which stated, basically, I'm of course simplifying things, that the more Jews settle the land of Israel under the auspiciousness of the state of Israel, the more redemption is close, because it is as if God's will were acting through his people, through the people of Israel, on the land. And there's this unification of these 3 points: God, people, and land. And so that was the beginning of the settlement project, Gush Emunim, etc., which basically changed the history of Israel, Israel's politics, Israel's geopolitics, changed Israel completely. One thing, though, for Cookism, redemptive process as such could not be reversed. There was no way back from conquering more and more of the land of Israel and settling it. And as we all know, there was withdrawal, there was reverse in this process. Israel withdrew from the Sinai Desert in 82 with the peace accords with Egypt. It then withdrew from the central Palestinian cities in the West Bank in the Oslo process. And in 2000, it withdrew from the south of Lebanon, And in 2005, Israel withdrew from the whole of the Gaza Strip, dismantling the Gush Katif settlement cluster, 20-something settlements over there. So these withdrawals were a direct contradiction of the messianism of Cookism, and Cookism basically crumbled and nullified as a viable theological framework for religious Zionism in its entirety. So since 2005, basically, religious Zionism has no overall overarching framework of theology. And what happens is that it basically splintered in many different directions. Some of these directions are liberal and even progressive, feminist religious Zionism, liberal, pro-gay religious Zionism, pro-LGBT, etc. So there's certainly that. There's mainstream bourgeois middle-class religious Zionism. Obviously, that's the majority. And then on the right side, we've got the extreme side, we've got fundamentalist religious Zionism, which is what I want to talk about today. Now, let me share a PowerPoint presentation and talk about religious Zionist fundamentalism. As you can see, I hope here I want to talk about basically four types of Jewish fundamentalism. We're talking about the Chardal, the Kahanists, the Hilltop Youth, and Temple Activism, or the Temple Mount activists, right? Chardal is a very broad name for these groups. It's an acronym of Haredi Leumi, ultra-Orthodox nationalists, okay? And we can understand from that a lot about these groups. These groups are religious Zionists in sociology terms. They are part of that public, but they are thinking like ultra-Orthodox in many ways. How so? It's basically, the main thing is basically that they are, not that they are more stringent in their halachic observance, although they are, but the common mistake is to say, that's the difference basically. We've got mainstream religious Zionism, and these guys, these extreme guys, are more stringent, more pious, etc. That's not the issue. What is the issue is that they have a principle, objection, and rejection of modern humanistic values. In that, they are close to their Haredi counterparts, right? They reject feminism, they reject humanism, as in equality between all humans. They reject pro-LGBT, obviously, and they reject the liberal order in general. They just don't see what's the use. I mean, they feel it, they actually perceive it as a threat to their identity, as a secularizing force, which it is, and they want to counter it. Let me show you an example of what I mean by this. Just a second. Yeah. This is an example of how to understand this sort of fundamentalism. I've got two rabbis here talking about classes in school being either multi-co-ed or only boys or only girls, right? Look at the Rabbi Aviner. These are both living rabbis today, both main rabbis, prominent rabbis in religious Zionism. So Aviner says, the guiding line is that we have to separate as much as possible. We know that reality is not always like the halakha, but that's why we are given the Torah, to fix reality. The Torah is the ideal order of reality, and we are laboring years, sometimes generations, to make reality fit it. And as a direct answer comes, or in this argument, comes Rabbi Yuval Sherlow with another attitude. I'm making a deep claim that has ramifications on all the halachic world, and that's that the halakha accepts in principle the normal way of life, derech eretz, in the world. Normalcy is a primary factor in halakha. Of course, halakha will forbid part of the normal way of life and will add in other things, but in principle, halakha is based on the acceptance of the normal way of life. Okay, so I hope you can see here the different in principle attitude, whether we take halakha as a fixed, deterministic structure and mold reality into it, right? Just like crash it on reality and make reality fit it, or we have a dialogue with reality, right? The normal way of life is something that we are considerate of. I mean, something we take into account. That's the basic thing. Let's begin then with the 4 different types of religious fundamentalism. And the first is Hardal, as it were, right? And our representative for this will be our finance minister, Smotrich, who some years ago, 7 years ago, published what he calls the decisiveness plan or the subjugation plan. That the translation can go both ways, because in Hebrew it's Tochnita HaHachra'a, okay? And the Palestinians in the occupied territories and in Israel, in the West Bank and in Israel, have 3 options: surrender and agree to become residents with reduced voting rights, emigrate, or resist and be subjugated to the full force of the IDF, right? This is the program, and he published it in the Israeli journal Hashiloach, okay? Now, what makes this specifically fundamentalism? It's not only extremism, it's fundamentalism. And I want to give you a taste of Smotrich in another speech about the same subject. He says, there is one absolute and correct truth that is the one and only basis for existence, and with which everybody needs to comply. This is the basis for the approach of Joshua when he entered the land, which I seek to adopt even today. The 3 options are based on a midrash about Joshua. The foundation of our absolute truth is the faith in the Torah of Moses, which will not be replaced and over which no other will be given from the Creator, blessed be his name, is the one and only base on which we must establish the belief in the righteousness of the way and the fighting spirit of the IDF. The fact that in circles of Haaretz newspaper and in the general headquarters of the IDF, there are those who think differently cannot be any excuse, simply because we are right and they are wrong. What's fundamentalism here? Obviously, I think you obviously can see, but I'll spell it out. There is a narrowing down of tradition to a certain number of principles, usually taken to be the literal interpretation of the Bible. So Joshua did such and such when he entered the land to conquer it. We should do the same. There is a monolithic understanding of history. All of history is the same. Nothing changed fundamentally between 3,000 years ago and now. So we can just import and implant principles that were right then, or supposedly right then, like whatever Joshua did, for today, right? And fundamentalism, the type of Smotrich, also is expensive or imperialist fundamentalism, in that it wants to change the whole world to its own understanding. It's not enough for them to have their own little group and think believe whatever they want to believe. They want also you to know the truth and to comply with the truth. And so that's Smotrich's, right? As we can see here, I'll just share it again. Right. The fact that in the circles of Haaretz newspaper and the general headquarters of the IDF, there are those who think differently cannot be any excuse, simply because we are right and they are wrong. Okay, so we need to explain it, and if not, use force in order for them to comply. Right. Hardal, as I said, we're talking, the whole groups that we're talking about here are about 15% of religious Zionism, so it's 200,000 people in Israel. That's all. But they are very determined, very much motivated, and they have immense sway over even larger publics. And today they are in government. Smotrich is our Minister of Finance. That's Smotrich. Another group is Kahanism, as I said. Now, Kahanism, we are talking about a group that started with Rabbi Meir Kahana, who was an American Jew who came to Israel in the 70s. And basically propagated a rabidly racist law. He got into parliament in '84 and suggested laws such as segregation between Jews and Arabs in beaches, such as forbidding of Jews to have sexual intercourse with Arabs and vice versa. So this is the type of thinking that we're talking about here. Kahana himself was assassinated by a Muslim extremist in 1990, and his follower today is Itamar Ben-Gvir, our Minister of Police, if you can imagine that. Ben-Gvir has said 5 years ago that every word that Kahana ever said is totally relevant and that he is a diligent pupil of Kahana. He is presenting himself today as more moderate, though he still is very extreme, of course, but also I don't think he is really more moderate. I think if he gets enough power, he will do whatever Kahana said was proper to do. Kahanism basically stands on 3 pillars: racism, just as I just said, the rejection of secularism, liberalism, and democracy. So for Kahanism, the Israeli state as it is illegitimate because it is a secular state and should be dismantled. Okay? And finally, idealization of revenge. There's a lot of talk of revenge as something that Jews are commanded to do by God if they are attacked, if Jewish blood is spilled, etc. So that's the second group. We've got then the Temple Mount activism. And here, I'll just say, first of all, some words of, in general, we've got an amazing increase in Temple Mount activism over the last 15 or 20 years. Before that, religious Zionism was not interested in the Temple Mount as something active. I mean, it was interested, of course, for the Messiah to come and whatever, the third temple to be built, but that was way, way in the future. Over the last 15 years, activists from the religious Zionism have begun ascending the Temple Mount and even sometimes praying on the Temple Mount, which is forbidden according to the status quo agreed upon between Israel and the Palestinian Authority and Israel and Jordan. Jews can ascend the Temple Mount but not pray. Now, even ascending the Temple Mount is considered halachically wrong. Every major rabbinical figure over the last 200 years has forbidden Jews ascending the Temple Mount. It's a matter of purity and defilement. We don't need to get into it, but they have found a way to make this halachically kosher, which is perfectly legitimate. I mean, I don't think halakha can't change, but just to understand the context that we're talking about here. And most of the Temple Mount activists are ascending the Temple Mount for matters of nationalism and sovereignty. Okay, so you will hear people saying, I'm ascending the Temple Mount to show the Arabs that this is ours, to show the Palestinians that they think that this is a mosque, but actually this place is ours, and someday the temple will be built here. So that's mostly what we're talking about. Some on the very extreme of these Temple Mount activists are wishing to build the third temple even today on the ruins of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. They are, of course, very dangerous people, which the Israeli Secret Service is very concerned about and tries, obviously, to keep at bay and not let them carry out what they plan. Okay? So that's in general these people. And finally, we've got the Hilltop Youth, and I'll just share again what we were talking about. Yeah, these guys, right? These are young people, though sometimes in their 30s also, living on the outskirts and the fringes of settlements in the West Bank, in illegal outposts, illegal even according to Israeli law, not according to international law. And living in maintaining what you can call a romantic ethos of living close to the land, herding sheep, engaging in agriculture, trying to be a part of nature, living a biblical life, as it were. So they are these sort of hippies, which though part of their ethos is also being violent towards Palestinians, being in constant clash with their Palestinian neighbors. They will invade herding areas of Palestinian shepherds, and they will invade agricultural areas, and so they expand the settlement project all the time, again illegally according to Israeli law, though the law is not enforced in general. Only sometimes it is, but it's very lax, let's say. Now, they too do not think that Israel as it is today is legitimate. They want, most of them would want to dismantle the state as it is and establish a theocracy. And you can even find writings of them saying that Israel should be embarrassed internationally as much as possible in order to forward its demise. Okay. And I will just show a little bit of their ethos. This is a person named Raphael Labor, that is standing on the background. There's the village of Hawara burning, or at least some of it is burning. And he's saying there is something really exciting about this, what the army is unable to do, what the police will never ever do. Simple Jews come and carry out a natural act of vengeance, set fire to whatever they can. Okay, I want to emphasize here the words natural act of vengeance. First of all, revenge again is a very important value, ideal. They are avenging the murder of 2 settlers killed in a terrorist attack by Palestinians who came out of Hawara. This is what it's all about, right? And it's a natural act. This closeness to nature, this connection to the natural currents of being, etc. This is what these people are all about. Okay. Now, these in general are the 4 groups that we're talking about. Of course, they sometimes overlap, though there is a great difference between Smotrich, our Minister of Finance, and these Hilltop Youth. They're not the same people. Smotrich is, of course, much more organized and does not think that Israel, he's not imminently. He does not think that Israel should be dismantled as it is. He does think that Israel should be a theocracy, and he does push for that. But he does think that Israel as it is right now is legitimate temporarily, at least.
Tomer, let me just ask you one little
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
In terms of, you mentioned previously that all these four streams are basically about, it's not a big population, it's about 200,000 people approximately. And my question to that, it is really not a big number, but after the war, and especially because of all these, the PTSD and people watching TV, etc. Even I, when I speak with my friends who are left liberal, physicians, high tech, you name it, some of them say, well, maybe Kahana was right. So do you feel that there's shift from this 200,000 and this movement of whatever one of the 4 streams or all of them, is it becoming more popular?
No, look, Kahanism as it is, I mean, people are just basically expressing their frustration, their fear, their anger at what happened in the 7th of October. They're not actually joining the Kahanist party or movement. They may vote for Itamar Ben-Gvir next time, but it still doesn't mean that this population is growing. It means that, yes, it does perhaps have more support out of wider circles of the Israeli public because of what has happened. And we see that Itamar Ben-Gvir is rising in the polls, though he is at about 10 seats in parliament out of 120 for the last 2 months, I think. This is probably his glass ceiling. Yes, there are many people out of that 10 seats that are not religious Zionists as such. That's true. Yet I don't think that it's growing in such a pronounced way. But what I do think, and this will be my last, my summing up of this talk. What I think should concern all of us is the image of Judaism that these people paint. I mean, if Judaism in Israel becomes what these people believe, basically is created in their image and their likeness, I think there's a great danger for all of us, for all of our tradition. I mean, I don't believe anyone will want to be a Jew if this will be the face of Judaism. And our problem right now is that these people, however extreme and marginal they are in normal days, these are the people now in government. I mean, it's just unbelievable to think that Itamar Ben-Gvir, a person who has been convicted twice for aiding a terrorist organization, is our minister of police. It really is unbelievable, but that's reality. And I think here is where you need to be also concerned, because if these people have their way, and their way is ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians and eternal occupation of the West Bank, relegating Palestinians to second-class citizens as an ideology, etc. And also, and you've heard what I said about Kahanist racism. If Judaism will be in that image, will be painted in that color, I think we are headed for dark times. And I think that while you yourselves, I assume, are not Israeli citizens, or most of you are Jews. And as Jews, you should be concerned about that. And here I think there is a point where you can enter the ring. I mean, you have skin in the game, and I think it's important for you to voice your concerns, if not more than that. I think it has been done. And just for a final sentence, I mean, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have been ostracized and, boycotted by Jews everywhere in the world. Nobody would meet them except, very fringe organizations, and that's good. That's really what needs to be done. They cannot be legitimized as proper Jewish voices today. I think that's the challenge that lies ahead. Of course, in itself, a smaller challenge than the much bigger challenge, which, in my opinion, is ending the occupation of the Palestinians. So that's that for me, and I'll be glad to open up the stage for questions and dialogue now. Yair?
This has been an amazing talk, Tomer, and I'm going to introduce Danielle and Karen in a second. But I wanted to, who are my co-hosts, but I wanted to ask you a question because, like I told you, I think that people are recognizing what you're right. And you're talking about entering the ring, American Jews entering the rings. When I've been speaking with leaders and American Jews and rabbis, often it kind of falls under three buckets or categories. The reason that they're kind of hesitant. A, will it increase if they go against the government, especially during these times? Will this increase anti-Semitism globally and especially in the United States? That's the first bucket. The second bucket is sheket yorim, which basically means it's war. We don't talk politics in war, period, end of story. And the third point, you kind of touched upon it, is we're American Jews. We didn't serve in the army. We don't pay taxes in Israel. We don't vote. Why should we have the influence on a sovereign democracy? So I wanted to hear if you have any thoughts about that.
I mean, we are going through a wave of anti-Semitism, though, as we all can see, there's anti-Semitism both on the right and on the left. I can't predict what we can do that will increase anti-Semitism, what we can do that will decrease anti-Semitism. I think certainly if Jews oppose Jewish fundamentalism, Jewish supremacy, Jewish racism, I think it can actually decrease anti-Semitism, at least from the left. But that shouldn't be our concern. Really, anti-Semites will be anti-Semites. I think it's very hard to convince an anti-Semites that Jews are okay, and anti-Semites that Jews are okay. It's just not in the cards. And we need to do what we must consciously do to stand up for what's right, and to protect the name of our heritage and our tradition and our identity. That's all. Now, the second thing you said is sheket yorim, right? It's war. We don't say anything. I think we're past that stage. Even in Israel, there are right now demonstrations against the government, and we are already inside I mean, in the midst of polemics, of political polemics in Israel, and let me say, our prime minister is head first in a political campaign. I mean, he's totally invested in his next re-election. So, I don't think it's feasible or reasonable to withhold our words until some other time. And lastly, yeah, as I said before, yes, you're not citizens, you're not voting here, and when rockets are flying, they're not flying over your head. That's true, and it's an important distinction. I don't think it's something to be brushed aside. But you are Jews. What happens here influences you. The very fact that we're talking about anti-Semitism means that you are also influenced by it. There is anti-Semitism because of what is happening in Israel. And that's it. I mean, you have skin in the game. And while I don't think that anything is legitimate for a non-citizen to do, I think a lot of things as being part of the Jewish people are legitimate. I mean, you are part of us, right? And we are part of you. And I think, again, there are some phenomena that need to be stood up against. I mean, perhaps engaging in your normal day-to-day political argument between left and right in Israel is something that maybe you would prefer not to do, but this is not a normal debate between right and left. This is opposing Jewish fundamentalism. This is opposing Jewish supremacy. And here I don't think it's a matter of opinion. We oppose it just like we oppose anti-Semitism, just like we oppose racism against blacks, just like we oppose homophobia. This is the same type of extremism that is just not part of political discourse. It can't be legitimized. It needs to be taboo. It needs to be kicked out of the tent. So here, I think your voice should be heard.
And the other thing that I hear from a lot of American Jews who have young kids like myself is, how do we want, when our kids grow up to be their 20s and 30s, will they be connected to Israel deeply and Zionist if Israel continues this trajectory? So with this, I wanted to introduce Danielle and Karen, good friends of mine. Both they're American and Israelis. And I'll pass the stage to Danielle and Karen. Maybe you have personal questions after this amazing talk. And also, if you can start, telling us or asking Tomer questions from the audience.
Yes, thanks, Yair. First of all, I just put in the chat a list of different action items for people who want to get more involved. Specifically, I want to point out action item number 4. We have an announcement group. We call it the War Room. You can join that and be in touch with us and be aware of all the different activities that we're doing for the hostages and for the Israeli democracy. I will start with the first question, came pretty early on, which I'm also a partner to this question. You said that they are a rising elite, the fundamentalist Jews in Israel are a rising elite. What exactly do you mean by that?
So, no, first a correction. I said that religious Zionism in general is a rising elite, okay? So there's a distinction. Most of religious Zionism, and again, maybe I need to stress this out, most of religious Zionism is not fundamentalist. Most of it is mainstream, middle class, just your run-of-the-mill Israelis, okay? Yes, they observe the halakha, they are orthodox, they are right-winged, certainly. They think the settlements are great, yes, but they are not fundamentalists. There is a distinction. They are distinct liberal lines in their thinking. They can be pro-LGBT, they are certainly democratic, etc. They don't want a halachic state, a theocracy. Okay. Wait, and I forgot the other half of the question.
Just what do you mean?
The rising elite. No, I'm saying this public in general is a very ideological public. Again, they are right-winged, but also they care deeply. They care deeply about the state of Israel. They are very patriotic, and they give from themselves to the state. I mean, and if we look at the history of Israel, we can see a decline first in the hegemony of the labor movement that was basically ruling Israel until 77, right? And the really the decline of them as an elite, as a serving elite of Israel, like the kibbutzim. They're still kibbutzim, but they are no longer, the part of the taken as an ideal, the ideal Israelis. So there's this. I'm not saying they are. The religious Zionism is today the elite in Israel, but they are certainly a rising elite, and as such a very important public.
Great, thanks. Karen, take it away.
Yep. Thank you, Tomer. So the next question is, how does this group of people, and I think it's meant for the government, how do they justify deserting the hostages if it's a mitzvah to rescue them?
Yeah, okay. Good question. We're seeing something pretty disturbing right now in Israel. I will say, they're not justifying deserting the hostages. They are saying that the hostages aren't the primary goal of the war. First, we have to destroy Hamas. Now, I think they're doing it very untactfully, very obnoxiously. That they are hurting a lot of people, but I don't think that in general this is not an argument that can be held in a normal way. I mean, if Hamas conditions the release of hostages with the end of war and the return of Hamas to rule Gaza, I can understand why Israel should not allow that, right? Because basically that means Hamas won the war, even with all its casualties and with the destruction of a lot of Gaza. Hamas basically returns to point A and is simply making, taking its time and getting ready for the next 7th of October next year, in 5 years from now, or whatever. So it's an argument that can be held and should be held. They're doing it very, very unwisely. And yes, they are, halakha, yes, they are ignoring parts of the halakha, though they are emphasizing other parts of the halakha. Halakha is something that you can always play with, as we all know. So yeah, that's not the main thing, I would say.
Great. As a diaspora Jew, what would that mean for the right of return, and how do the diaspora Jews enter the conversation?
The right of return of Jews?
Mm-hmm. I guess.
What would mean? A theocracy?
Yeah, the whole rise.
I think, Daniel, I think probably they mean we have a lot of, in the US now, there's a lot of mixed marriages. So what happens if the father is Jewish? What happened to the grandkids? Because that's the main thing here right now.
Oh, yeah.
The grandkids rule that they want to pass.
One of the first projects that this government wanted to execute was the changing of the law of the right of return, changing it to admit only orthodoxly halachically kosher Jews, right? That's one of the first things they wanted to do. Then they got mixed up in the judicial overhaul and they delayed that a bit. But this is certainly their plan. So again, here is another way that all of you have skin in the game. These people want to change the law of return so that grandchildren, or even children of mixed marriages, if the father is Jewish and the mother is not Jewish, today the law grants these people, their children and grandchildren, citizenship in Israel as part of the law of return. They want to cancel that for only Jews to be able to immigrate to Israel. And by the way, only people who convert to Judaism through Orthodox rabbis. No Reform, no conservative, no Reconstructionist, no nothing except an Orthodox rabbi. And by the way, not even all the Orthodox rabbis. They already have a list. So yeah, it would mean a change in the law of return and a narrowing of the people who have a right to use it.
Great, thank you. So the next question, I'm going to ask you about the occupation of the Palestinians. You had mentioned the occupation of the Palestinians, and the question is, in your opinion, who do you propose to lead the Palestinians? Are there any potential leaders who will accept the existence of the Jewish state?
That's a good question. The Palestinians have been terrible partners for negotiations and for peace. It is a question whether we can find a Palestinian leader who will fully accept the existence of the state of Israel, let go of the law of return, of the right of return, sorry, for them, which obviously, if there's a right of return into Israeli territory, there's no more the state of Israel. It's a question. It's a good question, and I don't know, but I think we need to try. I think there is no other solution except parting ways into two states, and if we don't have that solution, I think that's the end of Zionism. That's the end of Israel as any feasible, worthy society. That means eternal occupation or a one-state solution, and both mean the end of Zionism. So I want to try.
Can you just clarify what you just said? And the reason that I'm asking it is because I hear a lot of voices, Israelis and American Jews, saying, well, after October 7th, we have no partners and there's no way for peace. And the only way that we see, and it's not one or two, it's many, many people who mention that the only way to preserve and continue with Zionism is to eliminate the dream of two-state solution. So I know that you just mentioned it very briefly, but can you go a little bit into it? Why do you think that any other solution other than a two-state solution is, you mentioned the end of Zionism?
Look, Zionism was never only about making a safe haven for Jews. It was always also about establishing a model society, or at least a worthy society. At first it was socialist, but there were other dreams. It was always also for Jews to live decently in a sovereign state of their own. And what people are proposing as an eternal occupation basically means the end of Zionism simply for by the fact that we will not be able to establish in Israel a worthy society, let alone perhaps even not a democratic society, right? What does it mean to keep millions of people under military occupation forever? What does that mean for us? And now you can say, well, we have no choice. It's morally okay because the alternative is being dead, right? You can say that, but I would still say it's the end of Zionism. I would still say, then that's it. We're lost. We're lost. Because what you're saying is, the analogy I would use is a person on a deserted island that has to eat human flesh for the rest of their lives in order to survive. What choice do they have? They have to eat human flesh in order to survive, but that's it. That person has no worthy life, has no life he cannot live a moral life. That's it. Yeah, he has to do it in order to survive, but that's it. He's dead, basically, in a moral way, in every moral way. That's what these people want for Israel, to be dead morally, right? To be eating human flesh for the rest of its existence. That's what an eternal occupation means, right? Now, that's one option. Another option is a one-state solution that sometimes Americans are fond of, even Jewish Americans sometimes, which I think is not understanding that there are two nations here, two peoples who actually don't like each other in a very deep way, and that even if they would have liked each other, basically it means the end of Zionism because Jews will not be sovereign anymore in their own country. So even if there would be no more conflict and everybody would love each other, which won't be the case, it basically means that I will be a citizen of a country in which which is not the national home of the Jewish people. As a Zionist, that's not what I'm interested in. I mean, if I wanted that, I would live in California, right? Great place, amazing place. I lived there for 3 years, right? But I'm a Zionist because I want to be sovereign in my own country. I want to be responsible for everything that happens, for the educational system and for the army and for the sewer system. And if something goes right, I'm responsible it and I'm proud of it. And if something goes wrong, I'm also responsible for it. And I berate myself or I try to do better. That's the whole idea, right? So even if people here would have loved each other, the Israeli and the Palestinians, which is of course not the case, it still means the end of Zionism. And it's not the case because they don't like each other. And then for anybody who offers the one-state solution, I would simply ask, who gets to control the army? The Jews or the Palestinians? Because if it's the Jews, it's only an army, it's 100% Jewish army, it's still not a two-state solution because Jews hold all the power, not the one-state solution. And if the Palestinians hold the army or it's a half-half army, obviously it's civil war or simply a massacre.
Great. I really liked your answer. I can relate to it. I'll ask the next question. Since there are settlers who are recruited to the army, how is the army affected by these new soldiers? And I just want to say to the person asked, they're not new. They've always served in the army. So, but how is the army really affected?
No,
by
but
this?
perhaps this person is pointing at something that is new, that is settlers who are getting armaments like guns from Itamar Ben-Gvir, from our Minister of Police, and forming militia in the occupied territories. This is something a bit new. So there are always settlers in the army. By the way, I just want to say most settlers are great people. I mean, and they're okay people. They can be outstanding citizens and individuals, and we should know that. I mean, this is I'm talking in the majority. Some of them are very extreme, and when they get to the army, they can translate their extremism to something that is allowed for them to do when they are in uniform, which is of course very bad. What is new is Ben-Gvir supplying guns to settlers who are considered kitot konenut. How would you say that in English? They're these
maybe an armed watch, an armed
arms
community
watch,
watch.
citizens on patrol. They were like not officially in the army, but they do get a uniform and a gun. And then, yes, and these people are much more liable to abuse their position and their weapons against Palestinians. Yeah.
Tomer, I want to jump in because there's a lot of questions, but and by the way, we may go a little bit beyond 2 or 9 o'clock airtime. There's a question from George Landow. In your opinion, and I want to extend that question a little bit, what right do the 200,000 people have to force their beliefs on over 6 million Jews in Israel? And I think a bigger question that may be difficult for America, given the different political systems, understand, how do we get to the situation that 200,000 people, which is a fraction, such a small number, have been in such power of the government, the leadership of the Shabak and the police, and the finances? So maybe you can comment a couple words.
Yeah, the second question is, of course, the crux of the matter. They don't have any right. The first question is, no, they don't have any right. Obviously, they don't, right? Obviously, what they're talking about is the end of democracy, is the end of the liberal public sphere in Israel, and I don't think anybody has a right to do that. What happened for them to gain such power is a political accident or perhaps political malice. What happened is that Netanyahu needed every single right-wing vote in order to stay in power. And so 2 years ago, he took even the Kahanists, which were till then beyond the pale, taboo even inside religious Zionist circles. Even religious Zionists wanted nothing to do with them because they were so overly outspokenly racist. And Netanyahu forced by political pressure these people into the religious Zionist party. And in another twist of political fate, this was the only party left for religious Zionists to vote for in the last election. They did not have a party of moderate mainstream religious Zionists. And so that party got in parliament, and Netanyahu needed them, of course, and they used their leverage on Netanyahu as best they could, and they got the finance ministry and they got the police ministry. And that's the tragedy that we are in right now. Yeah.
Thank you. So the next question refers to Chok HaLaum. So I guess you're going to have to explain Chok HaLaum to some of the Americans on the call. But what are the chances to reverse the law of the Chok HaLaum, the Jewish state, as the war brought again the injustice of it, especially towards minorities who serve in the war?
Yeah. Look, the nation-state law, the Chok HaLaum, states a few things. States that Israel is only the nation state or the national home of the Jewish people, and it has some other clauses that discriminate for Jews and against non-Jews in Israel, like in terms of housing, especially. Now, I will say personally, I don't think that the law of the nation-state law in itself is something that should be abolished. I think it's possible to have a nation-state law which is okay, not this law, but a nation-state law. I think it is possible to have a law stating that a certain country is only the country of a certain ethnic group. I think basically that's the whole point of ethnic nationality, to have a country that is the national home of the Jews or of the Hungarians or of the Greeks or of the Japanese or of the Koreans, right? It's something that's done in a lot of places. What is missing in this nation-state law is a clause stating in all other dimensions, this state is the home of all of its citizens, and their equal rights should be respected under the law. That's the clause that every other nation that has a nation-state law has in that nation-state law, and that we do not. And what needs to be changed in legislation is adding that clause to the nation-state law. Yes, certainly now that this war has brought into the forefront the sacrifice of minorities, Druze and Bedouins in Israel, and the fact that they are dying, actually spilling their blood for the security of Israel and of the Jewish population in Israel, and are getting, unequal rights by this nation-state law.
It's a really sore point, this law we have in Israel. To continue with the soreness, a good question here that actually is exactly pinpointing why we wanted you to come and talk to us. Why wouldn't any of the left and moderates join a coalition to help build bridges? In this, I'm assuming in general, but maybe more specifically in the current government is very current, very, relevant.
Yeah. Well, our whole political ordeal over the last 3-4 years began by the demand from the center and the left for Netanyahu to resign. When Netanyahu when Netanyahu was indicted for 3 different acts of bribe, breach of trust, and fraud. Thank you, fraud. The norm in Israel was that a prime minister who is accused of these crimes or any crimes to that effect resigns. Olmert resigned, Rabin resigned in his first government, 1974. These things happen, and Netanyahu simply refused to resign. I think the demand for him to resign is perfectly legitimate, and I don't think it's legitimate for Netanyahu not to resign. By the way, Netanyahu demanded Olmert resign when Olmert was faced with similar charges, and suddenly, of course, he doesn't want. So why doesn't the left join the government? Because Netanyahu can't be trusted. Netanyahu is under trial. And Netanyahu proves every day that he is unfit for governing, in my opinion. I mean, he is dealing more with politics and his future re-election than the war. He is even during war, he is splitting the people into two. He is instigating hate towards one part of the populace in Israel, one part of the citizenry. He's just not fit to rule. And so I don't think, the left should join the government. I think elections should be held as soon as possible.
Tomo, let me ask you a personal question. Several people send me on WhatsApp a question. Hayim yeh beseder, which in Hebrew basically means, are things going to be okay? Are you optimistic? Because there's so much pessimism in Israel and depression because of the war and the casualties and the government. People feel that, they don't want to go to the streets again because people are in PTSD, broken. What do you think that is going to happen near future, long future?
Look, it's hard to be optimistic. I'll say honestly, my major concern, really, we are stuck between the fundamentalists of both sides. We've got the Hamas on one side, which will not agree to any Palestinian state that is not over the whole, from the river to the sea, basically. And we've got our own fundamentalists, lehavdil, but not too lehavdil, okay? Which are the greatest danger, I think, to the flourishing of Israel in the future. They just won't. They also won't accept any compromise. I mean, they won't with the Palestinians, and they will use violence as they did in the past to thwart any going forward towards a compromise with the Palestinians. And we're stuck in the middle. If there is one point of optimism that I can give, it's what happened over the last year when we saw an immense civic movement rise out of nothing, with actually millions of Israeli citizens going out into the streets week after week in what I think is an unprecedented show of civic activism. Really, I don't think in the entire world you could see such a proportion of the populace holding demonstrations for so long against the government. It was very impressive, and we discovered amazing strength inside the Israeli populace, inside the Israeli people. I mean, there are amazing people here that are so motivated and so willing to sacrifice a lot, time and a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of energy and sometimes health for the sake of this country. And if there is a point of optimism, it's that what we discovered this year about the strength of the people here.
And a follow-up question that I'm also getting a bunch of texts is, and I told you that I'm not going to ask you this question, and feel free to the next question is, so let's say a lot of American Jews are hearing your message and they feel compelled to move for this reason or that reason. What do we need to do here as American Jews? We can't vote. What are some of your suggestions? And again, if you don't feel comfortable mentioning that.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, so first of all, you have a voice and you should voice yourself, right? Your voice should be heard in Israel, what you're for and what you're against. But also you have your congressman person and your senator, and there are things that they can do that can push Israel in the right way. I think it's obvious that Israel is totally dependent on the US. I'm glad the US is such a fantastic partner and friend of Israel, but Israel should be nudged in the right direction. I mean, and some things that this administration has done lately were good in pushing Israel to the right direction. So again, I think you should use your leverage as such. And I'm not going to go into details, but basically that's the direction. These two things: voicing yourselves and pushing Israel in the right direction. Yeah. You are American citizens, right? You certainly have a right to influence your government. Okay, Yair?
So I want to continue what you just said about that. It relates to the action items that we wrote. Contacting local representatives is super easy. You go online, you type in local representatives with your zip code. You'll get straight to their websites and you can contact them and write to them. You can call them. It really helps. I personally met already 4 representatives from Pennsylvania, and they have been very attentive, and hopefully they will help us. Also, contact your local community leaders, your rabbis, your local federations, AIPAC, J Street, whatever Jewish organization you belong to. AIPAC and J Street are lobbying forums. They can take your complaints and your issues up to those politicians and reinforce what you had contacted them about. You can join us in our war room group. You can host us as speakers to your community, and we can talk and give more information about what people can do and reinforce this message that Dr. Persico has communicated so clearly. And you yourselves, you can serve as ambassadors. Talk to your families, talk to your friends, talk to your congregants in the synagogues, explain to them how dire the situation is and how important it is that we as American Jews, voice these concerns and bring them into action. So just wanted to recap this important issues. And Karen, you can go ahead with the next question.
No, I think we've really addressed most of the questions. I just want to, first of all, thank you, Tomer, and thank you, Yair, for bringing Tomer to this group. Thank you to all who are in attendance today. And I just want to add that to piggyback off of Danielle, this is not a time to remain silent. As American Jews, we have a voice, and if we don't voice it now and help Israel, some of what Tomer has said and some of his fears can really come to fruition. We have a large American Jewish population that is almost always, usually in the past, silent about what happens in Israel. That's how we were brought up. That's how we learned. And this is not the time to do that. We can show our love and support of Israel, and that love and support of Israel needs to be that we are not okay with this government changing the tune of Israel to not be a democracy, because that's really how it stands. And so your voices are needed now. Please help us raise the awareness in the community. As Danielle said, we're all happy to come out and help speak, help raise awareness, help bring more speakers. And thank you very much.
And again, this was a great ending comment, Karen. Thank you very much, Tomer. This was so important for us to hear. And just as a reminder, we're going to have these weekly Sunday meetings. However, next Sunday, in order to mark the 150 days of the kidnapped people in Gaza, stay tuned, because we're going to have a very, very special and large event in Philadelphia. Likely there's going to be well over 1,000 people, and we will communicate with you via the different groups. Tomer, toda rabba rabba, v'shavua tov lekulam. Have a good week, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Tomer.